It started out like any other evening. The kind where you're not expecting anything, where you're already half thinking about what leftovers are in the fridge and if the game's still on when you get home. That's exactly where my mind was when I pulled into the garage that Tuesday night. Normal. Routine. Comfortable. But as soon as I opened the door and stepped into the kitchen, that comfort dissolved. Sarah was there already, perched at the counter like she'd been waiting. Not in the sweet, "Hey honey, you're home" kind of way. No. More like a teenager who just got caught doing something she shouldn't. She had her phone clutched to her chest, both arms wrapped around it like it was a secret she physically needed to protect. The glow from the screen reflected off her face, but she clicked it off so fast you'd think it burned her. "Hey, you're back early," she said, flashing me a smile. But it wasn't the kind of smile that made my chest warm like it used to. This one was tight, strained, like it was glued on with effort. "I'm not," I replied, dropping my keys onto the counter louder than I meant to. Same time as always. That's when it hit me. Subtle but sharp. A lingering scent in the air. Cologne. Not her perfume. Definitely not mine. Expensive stuff too, rich, musky, the kind of scent that doesn't fade quickly. It didn't belong in my kitchen. I stopped, letting the silence stretch. Maybe she'd explain without me asking. Nope. She glanced down at her phone again, fingers fidgeting with the case like she was waiting for it to buzz. I cleared my throat. "Oh, that smell?" she said, suddenly waving her hand in the air, dismissive. "One of my coworkers hugged me goodbye today. He bathes in that stuff, I swear. Must have rubbed off on me. Gross, right? Too fast. Too rehearsed. It was a small thing. Could have been nothing. Could have been exactly what she said. But something in her tone, it didn't sit right. There was no casualness to it. Just this brittle, rushed attempt to shut the conversation down before it could even start. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Sarah hated awkward silences. Always had. But tonight, she leaned into it, burying herself back into her phone, pretending like my presence didn't fill the room. I watched her for a moment longer than usual. Not staring, not accusing. Just observing. Her shoulders were tight, like she was bracing for something. And she kept touching her hair, tucking it behind her ear, twisting the ends. Nervous tics? I walked over to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and kept the small talk going. Or at least tried to. "How was work today?" She shrugged. "Busy." That was it. Busy. Normally, she'd go on about her day, gossip from coworkers, meetings that could have been emails, the usual. But tonight? One word. Nothing more. That was when the second clue hit me. Subtle but clear once you knew what to look for. Sarah was always a face-up phone person. She liked seeing the notifications pop up. But today, that phone had not left its screen-down position on the counter, and now it was cradled to her like it was a lifeline. A thought flickered across my mind. Was she waiting for a message? Or hoping one wouldn't come through while I was standing right there? I took a long sip of water, giving her time to fill the silence. She didn't. Instead, she stood up abruptly, muttering something about laundry, and left the kitchen, phone still clutched to her side. She didn't look back. I stood there alone, the faint trace of that cologne still hanging in the air, wrapping around me like a fog. And that's when I felt it. That sinking, twisting pull in my gut. You know the one. The feeling you get when you walk into a room and know, without being told, that something's wrong. The thing is, this wasn't the first time. Over the past few months, Sarah had been different. Subtle things. Hard to pin down, easy to excuse. But they added up. Tonight, though, it was like someone had finally pulled the curtain back just enough for me to see the edges of what was really going on. I told myself I was being paranoid. That one weird hug from a cologne-soaked coworker wasn't a smoking G*N. But even as I thought it, I knew I was lying. To myself. Because people don't change overnight. They shift slowly, like continents moving beneath your feet, until one day you realize you're standing on an entirely different map. And that's exactly what was happening here. When Sarah came back into the kitchen, her phone was nowhere in sight. Her smile was back too, but it was the same tight-lipped mask from before. "You're quiet tonight," she said, trying to sound casual. "Long day," I replied. We both knew that was code for, "I don't buy your story." But neither of us said it out loud. Instead, we danced around each other, the way couples do when neither wants to be the first to break the fragile surface of normalcy. We ate dinner in near silence. The TV murmured in the background, some cooking show she liked, but it might as well have been white noise. I caught her glancing at her phone twice during dinner. Once when she thought I wasn't looking, and once when a notification lit up the screen from across the room. Each time, she was quick to hide it. By the time I loaded the dishwasher, I could feel the space between us stretching wider than the walls of our home. I wanted to ask her outright. Wanted to demand the truth. But there was this voice in my head telling me to wait. That if I pressed now, she'd shut down. deny, deflect. I wasn't ready to play that game yet. Instead, I watched her. Studied the way she avoided my eyes, the way her hands were never still. And the way that scent, expensive, masculine, unfamiliar, clung to the air long after she left the room. Later that night, as I lay in bed pretending to scroll through my phone, I kept replaying that moment in the kitchen. The look on her face. The nervous energy. The too perfect excuse. I knew my wife. I knew her tells. And tonight, she had all of them. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It wasn't just a bad feeling. Something had shifted between us. Something real. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted to know the full extent of it. But deep down I knew this was just the beginning. Over the next few days it was like a switch had flipped in my head. I'd always thought of myself as a trust until proven otherwise kind of guy. Maybe even to a fault. But after that night in the kitchen with Sarah's too quick excuse and that foreign scent lingering in the air, I couldn't unsee the signs anymore. And truth be told, once you start looking, you start seeing everything. At first, it was small things I had chalked up to stress, work, or even my own insecurities. Like how Sarah's phone had basically become an extension of her hand lately. She was always on it, even more than usual. Texting, scrolling, smiling to herself. And every time I'd enter the room, she'd tilt the screen away from me. Subtle. Practiced. Like muscle memory. Then there were her so-called late nights at work. I used to buy it. No questions asked. Sarah's job had always been demanding. Deadlines, client meetings, office drama, the usual corporate chaos. But now, looking back, the excuses had become too routine, too convenient. One night, I remember glancing out our bedroom window around midnight just out of habit. And there it was, her car, sitting quietly in the driveway. Lights off. Engine cold. But she was supposed to be stuck at the office that night. When she finally walked through the door around 1 a.m., she acted surprised to see me still awake. Gave me some half-hearted line about a late meeting, running over and grabbing drinks with coworkers. But there was this slight hitch in her voice, a hesitation she hadn't perfected yet. At the time, I wanted to believe her. I really did. But now? Now it felt like every memory had been dipped in a new shade of suspicion. I started noticing patterns. The way she'd become so emotionally distant. Conversations that used to flow easily between us had turned into obligatory small talk. I'd ask how her day was and I'd get generic answers. Busy. Same old. Nothing exciting. When was the last time she had shared something real with me? I couldn't even remember. Even the physical side of things had shifted. Hugs became perfunctory. Kisses were a formality. Her touch, once warm and familiar, now felt like a placeholder, something done out of habit, not affection. It wasn't just me imagining things. The warmth was gone. I thought back to the weekends. How she'd started making plans without including me. Brunches with the girls, shopping trips, self-care days. And yet I couldn't remember the last time she'd introduced me to these so-called friends. Were they even real? Or were they just convenient alibis? And then there was her sudden need for privacy. Sarah, who used to leave her phone on the kitchen counter without a second thought, now carried it with her everywhere. Bathroom trips. Showers. Even when she went to water the plants in the backyard, that phone was glued to her side. I told myself people grow apart sometimes. That maybe we were just in a rough patch. 7 years of marriage isn't a fairy tale every day, right? But deep down there was a gnawing certainty that this was different. There was one particular evening that still stands out. We were sitting on the couch, watching a movie, something we hadn't done in a while. Halfway through, her phone buzzed. Not once, not twice, but 3 times in quick succession. She didn't even flinch. Just grabbed it, screen tilted away from me, fingers moving swiftly as she typed. I wasn't supposed to notice. I wasn't supposed to ask. But I did. Everything okay? She smiled, that same tight smile. Just work stuff. You know how it is. But I didn't know how it was. Not at 9:30 p.m. on a Sunday. Not with that little flicker of guilt flashing in her eyes before she looked away. That was the night I realized I was no longer a participant in our marriage. I was an audience member, watching her play a part she didn't even believe in anymore. I started keeping mental notes. Little red flags cataloged in the back of my mind. Like how she had suddenly become very conscious of her appearance. More trips to the salon. New clothes. Lingerie tags hidden at the bottom of the shopping bags. And sure, maybe that would be normal if she'd bought them for us. But they were never for us. Our int asterisk Macy had dwindled. Yet she was putting in all this effort. But not with me in mind. That stung more than I cared to admit. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had excused. how often I had chosen to give her the benefit of the doubt. Because confronting the alternative, that was terrifying. Admitting your spouse might be unfaithful isn't just about catching them in a lie. It's about confronting the fact that the person you've built your life with might be living a completely separate one without you. And that's a level of betrayal no one prepares you for. I remember one conversation in particular. It had been a few weeks back, before things started unraveling so obviously. I had asked her about changing plans last minute. She was supposed to have dinner with me and my sister but had bailed, claiming an emergency meeting. When I questioned it gently, she snapped. Defensive. Angry. "I don't need to explain my work schedule to you, Mark," she'd said, her tone laced with irritation. "Why are you always so suspicious lately?" I hadn't been. Not back then. But looking back, maybe she had already been laying the groundwork. Accusing me of being paranoid so that when the real questions started, she could brush them off as just more jealous husband nonsense. Classic misdirection. In those quiet hours after she'd go to bed, I'd find myself replaying these moments, connecting dots that had once seemed isolated. It was like piecing together a puzzle where the image was slowly becoming clearer, and I didn't like what I was seeing. It wasn't one thing. It was everything. The way she avoided eye contact when talking about her day, the increased screen time, the sudden surge in solo outings, the emotionally checked-out demeanor at home. It all pointed to something I wasn't ready to admit, but couldn't ignore any longer. And here's the kicker. Through it all, I kept hoping I was wrong. Kept hoping that maybe I was just being insecure. That maybe this was all some elaborate misunderstanding. That maybe Sarah was just going through something she hadn't figured out how to share with me yet. But hope is a dangerous thing when it keeps you tied to someone who's already halfway out the door. Still, I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Because when you go looking for the truth, you have to be prepared for what you might find. And at that point, I wasn't sure if I had the stomach for it. But I knew one thing for certain. If I kept ignoring the signs, I'd only have myself to blame when it all came crashing down. It was a Thursday evening when the tipping point came. I had spent the better part of the week replaying every odd glance, every too-sweet excuse, every moment Sarah had slipped further away from me. By then, my doubts weren't whispers anymore, they were sirens. That morning, as I poured my coffee, Sarah casually mentioned she'd be working late again. "Big client pitch," she said, stirring her tea without looking up. "Could be a late one. Don't wait up." The words slid off her tongue so smoothly it was almost impressive. Except now I knew better. She didn't notice how my grip tightened on the mug, how I didn't even try to hide my skepticism. "Where's the meeting?" I asked, feigning casual curiosity. She blinked, just for a second, a glitch in her performance. "At the office, of course," she said quickly. "Where else would it be?" The lie settled into the air between us, heavier than the steam rising from our cups. That's when I decided. Enough was enough. I was done playing the clueless husband. That evening, after she left, I didn't sit on the couch. Didn't distract myself with mindless TV. I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and drove straight to her office building. Felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's story. The city was winding down from rush hour, the streets thinning out, lights flickering on in office windows. As I parked across from her building, I rehearsed the possible scenarios in my head. Maybe she really was working late. Maybe this would all blow over. But deep down, that familiar twist in my gut told me otherwise. I walked into the lobby, my heart hammering in my chest. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "Hi, can I help you?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm looking for my wife, Sarah. Just thought I'd surprise her, bring her dinner." The receptionist's expression shifted. Not shock. Just that awkward hesitation you see when someone knows more than they should. "Oh, Sarah actually left about 30 minutes ago. Sorry, I thought you knew." There it was. The first crack. I kept my smile intact. "No worries. Do you happen to know where she went?" She hesitated again, clearly weighing if she should say anything. She mentioned meeting a client at Bellini's, that Italian place a few blocks from here. Happens sometimes with big clients. Bellini's. Not a bad choice for a business dinner. but also the kind of place where low lighting and tucked-away booths made discretion easy. "Thanks," I said, turning on autopilot as I walked back to my car. The drive to Bellini's was a blur. My knuckles whitened around the steering wheel, my mind spinning through possibilities. I told myself it was still innocent. A work dinner. Networking. Professional. But deep down, I knew exactly what I was about to find. When I pulled up to the restaurant, I parked across the street, keeping my distance. The place was cozy, dimly lit, with large glass windows revealing small glimpses of its interior. I sat there, engine off, hands trembling in my lap. It didn't take long. Through the haze of my windshield, I spotted her. Sarah. Sitting at a corner table, facing slightly away, but close enough for me to see her laughing. Laughing like she hadn't laughed with me in months. Across from her sat a man. Early to mid-30s. Sharp suit. Confident posture. Leaning in too close. Their heads tilted together, their hands brushing occasionally on the table between them. I watched as she reached out, her fingers resting casually over his hand. And just like that, every lingering doubt evaporated. This wasn't a client meeting. This wasn't business. This was an asterisk Macy. The way she looked at him, soft, engaged, familiar, was a look I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. It was the way she used to look at me when we first started dating. Now it was for someone else. I felt my throat tighten, my pulse roar in my ears. A cold, suffocating clarity settled over me. She had been lying. All along. But I didn't storm inside. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I stayed in my car, a silent spectator to the wreckage of my marriage. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough to see them share a bottle of wine. Long enough to see him touch her wrist and watch her lean in closer, as if she wanted the world to shrink down to just the two of them. That's when it hit me, she wasn't even trying to hide it. Maybe not from me. Maybe not from herself. For the first time, I realized Sarah had already left our marriage long before I noticed. Physically, she was still in our home, still going through the motions. But emotionally? She was gone. Checked out. Present in body, absent in spirit. Watching them was like watching the final scene of a movie I hadn't realized was ending. I didn't need more proof. The ** Macy was proof enough. It wasn't just betrayal. It was confirmation of what I had suspected but had been too afraid to confront. The hardest part wasn't seeing her with someone else. It was the ease of it. The comfort. Like slipping into an old routine. Like I had never been there at all. As the evening wore on, I kept thinking back to every moment I had questioned myself. Every time I had doubted my gut because I wanted to believe in her more than I believed in my own instincts. That blind faith had been my undoing. When they finally stood up to leave, I sank lower in my seat. They didn't see me as they walked out together, side by side, her hand brushing against his in a way that was anything but professional. I waited until they were gone before starting my car. The drive home was quiet. No music. No distractions. Just the sound of my own thoughts, swirling like a storm. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I was numb. Not angry. Not devastated. Just empty. I walked inside, sat on the edge of the couch, and stared at the wall, the weight of what I had seen settling in slowly. I wasn't surprised. But knowing the truth, seeing it with my own eyes, was something else entirely. There's a particular kind of hurt that comes from watching the person you love act like a stranger. Not because they've changed, but because you've finally seen them without the filter of hope. That was what I had witnessed tonight. Not an affair unfolding, but the final proof that the woman I had loved had become someone I no longer recognized. The funny thing is, in that moment, I didn't even feel the urge to confront her. There was no need to demand answers. I already had them. Instead, I sat in the quiet, letting the truth settle into every corner of our home. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel paranoid. I felt clarity. Painful, undeniable clarity. And though I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, I knew. There was no coming back from this. You'd think catching your wife with another man would trigger some kind of explosion. Anger. Screaming. A confrontation right there on the spot. But none of that happened. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of our town, trying to outrun the image seared into my brain. Sarah, sitting across from him, their hands casually entwined, her laugh soft and familiar in a way that hadn't been reserved for me in months. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, suffocating. Like the air had thickened, wrapping around my throat just enough to remind me of what I had seen. What I had refused to see for too long. But still, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they really were discussing work, I told myself. Maybe the hand-holding was just platonic. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. But that was a lie. A soft, useless lie I told myself because the alternative was unbearable. As I circled through familiar streets that once felt like home, my mind kept looping through the past few months. Every little sign I had dismissed, every gut feeling I had buried under a mountain of it's nothing, and she'd never do that. I thought back to how she'd pull away from my touch, making excuses about being tired or stressed. The way she had suddenly become so protective of her phone, turning it face down, setting new passwords she never bothered with before. The defensiveness. The sudden fights over nothing. The emotional distance that had crept in slowly until it became a canyon between us. It was all there. All of it. And I had chosen not to see it. I drove for hours. Not toward anything. Just away. Away from the house we had built together. Away from the life I thought was solid. But the truth has a way of catching up with you no matter how far you drive. At some point, I pulled into the parking lot of an old gas station on the edge of town. The kind of place that hadn't changed in 20 years. I sat there, engine off, headlights dimmed, letting the weight of it all settle in. How had it come to this? Sarah and I weren't perfect. Far from it. We'd had our share of fights, of rough patches. But I had believed, stupidly maybe, that we were still in it together. Apparently, she had jumped ship while I was still patching up holes. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It wasn't just about her being with someone else. It was emotional. It was the lies. The carefully crafted excuses. The way she had let me carry the weight of our marriage alone while she slipped away, piece by piece, into someone else's orbit. I thought about confronting her. About going home, demanding answers, forcing her to look me in the eye and explain how we had gotten here. But what would that change? She'd deny it at first. Maybe cry. Maybe even apologize. But the damage was already done. Seeing her with him had ripped the blinders off. There was no unseeing it. No going back to pretending. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing that, despite everything, I still loved her. And that made it hurt so much worse. I still wanted to believe in the woman I married. The woman who used to leave me little notes in my lunch. The woman who used to call me just to hear my voice. The woman who once looked at me like I was her entire world. But that woman wasn't there anymore. Or maybe she never was. Maybe I had been in love with the idea of Sarah. The version of her I wanted to see. The version she had let me believe in. That thought was the cruelest cut of all. At some point, my phone buzzed. A text from her. Hey, heading home now. Work ran late. Love you. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Love you. Did she even understand what that meant anymore? Or was it just a habit, something she said because it was expected? I didn't respond. What was the point? By the time I finally drove home, it was well past midnight. The house was dark, quiet. I sat in the car for a few minutes, watching the soft glow of the porch light spill across the driveway. Funny how even the house felt different now. Like it knew what I knew. When I walked in, Sarah was already asleep. Or pretending to be. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I could hear her breathing, slow, steady, like she didn't have a care in the world. I stood there, watching her silhouette under the blankets, and felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger. Sadness. But mostly exhaustion. I didn't wake her. What was the point? Words would be wasted tonight. They'd be rehearsed. Polished. Lies wrapped in just enough truth to sting. Instead, I retreated to the guest room. It wasn't until I was lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, that the cracks really started to widen. I thought about the man at the restaurant. Who was he? How long had he been part of her life? Did she talk to him about me? About our marriage? Did she tell him she loved me before meeting him for dinner? Did she feel even a shred of guilt? That was the thing about betrayal, it makes you question everything. Not just the recent past. All of it. Every memory gets pulled under a microscope. Every moment becomes suspect. Was that smile real? Was that I love you genuine? Had she been slipping away for years and I just refused to see it? The worst part wasn't that she had betrayed me. The worst part was realizing how easy I had made it for her. I had trusted her. Completely. Blindly. Because that's what you're supposed to do when you love someone. You don't read into every late night, every guarded glance, every evasive answer. You trust. Until you can't. By the time dawn started creeping through the blinds, I hadn't slept a minute. My thoughts were loud, relentless. But in their own brutal way, they had given me clarity. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending. But even with that clarity, the path forward wasn't simple. Do you fight for someone who doesn't want to be fought for? Do you hold on to a marriage when you're the only one holding on? I didn't have the answers yet. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Things couldn't stay the same. Something had broken. And no amount of pretending was going to fix it. The days that followed blurred together. It was strange how life kept moving forward even when you felt completely stuck. Morning coffee still needed brewing. Bills still showed up in the mailbox. The sun still rose and set like clockwork. But inside, everything had shifted. Sarah went on pretending. Or maybe she thought I was the one pretending. We shared space but not much else. Conversations were surface level at best. How was your day? What's for dinner? The weather sure has been weird. We were two actors reading lines from a script that had stopped making sense. I kept waiting for her to slip, to confess, to at least show a crack in her carefully constructed version of reality. But no. She played her role well. Too well. But I wasn't playing anymore. That Tuesday morning, after another night spent tossing in the guest room, I made a choice. It wasn't dramatic. No slamming fists, no shouting matches. Just a quiet, decisive thought. I'm done. I couldn't keep living in limbo waiting for her to come back to a marriage she'd already abandoned. It was time for me to let go. By lunchtime, I had already contacted a divorce attorney. His name was Miller, recommended by a friend who'd been through something similar. He was blunt, efficient, and most importantly, understood that this wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. Sitting in his office, I laid everything out. The late nights. The lies. The man at the restaurant. I don't have hard evidence beyond my own two eyes, I said, feeling strangely detached as I spoke. But at this point, I don't need more. I know what I saw. And I know what I feel. Miller nodded. You'd be surprised how often that's enough. People get so caught up chasing a smoking G***, they forget that a broken marriage doesn't always come with a dramatic courtroom twist. Sometimes the quiet truth is the loudest. He slid a folder across the desk. We can do this clean. No drawn-out fights. You want out? She won't contest it. Trust me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of clarity. Cold, maybe? But clear. On the drive home, I rehearsed how it would go. How I'd tell her. How she might react. But honestly, I had no idea what to expect. That evening, when Sarah came through the front door, I was already seated at the kitchen table, the divorce papers in front of me. She paused when she saw them. For a split second, something flashed across her face. Not surprise. More like resignation. Mark, she said, setting her bag down gently. What's this? I didn't answer right away. Just watched her. Studied how carefully she kept her expression neutral, how her hands fidgeted slightly at her sides. I contacted a lawyer, I said, keeping my tone even. I'm filing for divorce. There it was. Out in the open. No going back now? She didn't gasp. Didn't cry. Didn't fall into hysterics like part of me had imagined. She just nodded. I figured, she said quietly. That was it. No excuses. No denials. Just quiet acceptance. And in that moment, I realized the worst had already happened long before this conversation. This wasn't the dramatic collapse of a marriage. This was the last few grains of sand slipping through an already empty hourglass. I don't want to fight, I continued. I don't want drama. I want out. Clean. Simple. Sarah sank into the chair across from me, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. I never wanted it to get here, she said. Didn't you? I asked, not accusing. Just curious. She didn't answer. Maybe because she couldn't. Maybe because she didn't want to lie anymore. For a while, we just sat there. The house felt heavier than usual, like the walls were listening in. I'll sign, she said finally. I'm not going to make this harder than it already is. And somehow that simple act of surrender hurt more than if she'd fought me on it. Because it confirmed what I already knew. She had let go of us long before I had. After that, the logistics took over. Bank accounts. Assets. Who gets what? We spoke in business terms as if we were dissolving a company, not a marriage. It was clinical. Almost surreal. But beneath it all, there was this strange sense of relief. Like we had both been holding our breath for months and now we could finally exhale. That night, I packed a bag. I wasn't staying another night in that house. Not with her in the next room. Not with the ghosts of what we used to be haunting every corner. I found a small apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy. One bedroom, bare walls, the kind of place you rent when you're not sure what comes next. But it was mine. The first night in that empty apartment, I sat on the floor with a cheap pizza and a six-pack. The silence was deafening at first. But then it wasn't. It was peaceful. For the first time in months, I wasn't watching her body language, analyzing her tone, waiting for the next excuse. I wasn't wondering who she was texting or if she was really where she said she'd be. I was just there. Alone. But free. The next morning, I took off my wedding ring. I had worn it every day for 10 years. It felt strange at first, the weight of it missing from my finger. But it was symbolic more than anything. A small, quiet declaration that I was finally ready to move forward. I didn't throw it away. Not yet. Instead, I placed it in a drawer. A chapter closed. In the days that followed, Sarah and I exchanged a few necessary messages. Coordinating paperwork, sorting through what little was left to divide. There was no bitterness in her texts. No attempts to reconcile. Just the cold, detached efficiency of two people untangling a shared life. I realized then that I wasn't angry at her. Hurt? Absolutely. But anger required energy. And I was too drained for that. Somewhere along the way, I had made peace with the fact that the person I married wasn't the person she had become. And maybe I wasn't the same man she had married either. People change. Sometimes in ways you can't fix. And that's okay. One afternoon, as I walked along the river near my apartment, I took the ring out of my pocket. Held it up to the sunlight, watching it glint. For a moment, memories washed over me, our wedding day, the early years, the laughter, the late-night talks. But then those memories shifted. To the lies. The distance. The man in the restaurant. I let out a slow breath and, without ceremony, tossed the ring into the river. It sank quickly, vanishing beneath the surface. Just like that. A symbol of something that had already been lost long before I let it go. As I stood there, watching the ripples fade, I felt something unexpected. Not joy. Not sadness. But peace. A quiet, resolute kind of peace. Because for all the pain, all the betrayal, I had made it through. And I was still standing.